What if I told you the government might actually send you money again? Not in some distant dream, but possibly right around the corner. And I'm not talking about some vague stimulus whisper. We're talking cold, hard rebate checks being floated by some of the biggest names in politics, and we've got direct words from Trump himself saying it's on the table. Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what's being proposed, how it could land in your bank account, and what the real chances are that this actually happens. Plus, I'll break down what most people are completely misunderstanding about this entire rebate idea, and whether it's really a win for working Americans or just another political headline that quietly fades away. If you're a working American who feels like you've been left behind while costs rise and wages stall, this might be one of the most relevant updates you'll hear all year. Especially if you're tired of empty promises and are actually looking for what could realistically put money back in your pocket. So hit that like button if you're ready for the truth and make sure you're subscribed, because this platform doesn't always push important news like this unless you're locked in. So here's what's happening. In the past 24 hours, there's been a noticeable uptick in chatter from both former President Donald Trump and sitting U.S. senators regarding a potential tariff rebate check. Not a stimulus check, not a tax refund, but a rebate funded by the record setting revenue the U.S. is pulling in from tariffs on foreign imports. If you haven't heard of this yet, don't worry. Most mainstream outlets are just starting to catch up, but the headlines are everywhere. And more importantly, it's not just talk. There's legislative movement already underway. Here's the setup. Trump recently mentioned in a public exchange that the US is bringing in so much money from tariffs that he's thinking about a little rebate for people of a certain income level. No, he didn't give a specific amount or rollout date, but those comments weren't off the cuff either. They were calculated. In politics, this is what they call testing the public pulse before taking a bigger step. And guess what? The feedback was immediate. Within hours, Senator Josh Hawley announced he's drafting legislation to deliver rebate checks to every working American. Yes, every working American. Now let's pause there. This is where a lot of people either get overly excited or instantly dismiss it as empty talk. But let's break it down rationally. Tariffs have brought in over $100 billion in revenue so far this fiscal year. That's not a projection, that's actual cash flow, customs duties that have already been collected from foreign imports. In June alone, the US raked in $27 billion just from tariffs. To put that in context, that's more than what some countries pull in for their entire yearly budget. So the money is real and the idea is simple. Since American consumers end up bearing the cost of tariffs indirectly, why not rebate a portion of that revenue back to them? Economically speaking, it's not a wild concept. It's a form of redistribution. Only instead of tax credits or stimulus payments, this is funded by foreign trade taxes, not your paycheck or income taxes. That's why the idea is gaining traction. It lets the government say, hey, we're taxing China, not you. And then they hand you a check. But here's the catch. And I want to be brutally honest here. Experts are not convinced this is likely to happen. And there are a few reasons why. First, while Trump and Hawley are pushing the idea, any actual check distribution would require congressional approval. That means bipartisan support. And not everyone in Congress is on board with another round of payments, even if they're funded through tariffs. A lot of lawmakers, especially fiscal conservatives, argue that this money should go toward paying down the national debt, which is now over $36 trillion. That's trillion with a T. So there's already a philosophical split forming. One side says, give it back to the people, while the other says, plug the deficit. Second, economists are warning that putting even more money into people's pockets could increase inflationary pressure. Yes, we're no longer in the same place as 2020, but consumer prices are still rising, and the Federal Reserve is already battling inflation. Analysts like Joseph Rosenberg from the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center argue that these rebates could trigger a repeat of pandemic era inflation patterns if not structured carefully. That means higher prices, not just bigger checks. But let me play devil's advocate for a second. If this rebate check were to go through, it wouldn't be structured like the COVID stimulus. That money was sent out to keep people afloat. Many had lost jobs, entire industries were shut down. This would be different. It's not a lifeline, it's a reimbursement. The framing is crucial. Trump and Hawley are saying, We charged foreign companies to sell in our market. We made a killing. We'll use some of that money to reward working Americans. And that narrative plays very well with a certain part of the electorate, especially as we move closer to election season. Still, let's get clear on what this would look like if it were to happen. Based on what Trump said and based on how previous stimulus checks were distributed, we're likely talking about income thresholds. For example, in the pandemic rounds, individuals making under $75,000 and married couples under $150,000 were eligible for the full payment. If this tariff rebate follows a similar model, it would be aimed squarely at low to middle income Americans. But again, no legislation has been passed yet. Right now, Hawley's proposal is still in the works, and Trump's comments are more suggestive than declarative. This is in the idea phase, but it's a very loud, very public idea. Now, let's talk about the emotional side of this, because for a lot of people, this isn't just about politics or policy, it's personal. The idea of receiving a check means breathing room. It means covering rent or groceries without using a credit card. It means some financial dignity. And for millions of Americans who feel like the economy is moving without them, this kind of rebate, even if it's small, is symbolic. It says, you matter. You deserve a piece of what's being generated in your name. That emotional weight is why this has traction. It taps into a very deep frustration that regular Americans are carrying the load while the system seems to only serve the top. Let's also bust one major misconception. A lot of people assume tariffs are just taxes on other countries. That's not how it works. Tariffs are placed on imports, so U.S. companies pay them when they bring goods in from abroad. Those costs often get passed directly to consumers. That means you've already paid. You're just not seeing it itemized on your receipts. That's what makes the idea of a rebate so compelling. It feels like a refund on something you never realized you were paying for. So, what happens next? Well, keep an eye on Senator Josh Hawley. If he introduces formal legislation in the coming days, as he's publicly committed to doing, then we'll have a real bill to track. From there, it becomes a question of support. How many senators back it, how much the rebate would be, and whether leadership in the House and Senate allow it to move forward. Expect lots of debate over deficit concerns, inflation, and fairness in the eligibility rules. Now, here's your key takeaway. This isn't fantasy. The numbers are real, the discussion is real. But we're still several steps away from seeing money land in people's accounts. If you're someone who likes to be ahead of the curve, now is the time to stay alert. Watch for that legislation. Watch for updated statements from the Treasury. And pay attention to how other politicians respond. Because if this gets popular enough with voters, it could become too politically valuable to ignore. And finally, what do you think? Should that money come back to working Americans in